Hey, everybody, this is Darren Francis from Signals in Higher Ed. And joining me today is Dr. Kemi Jonah, Vice Provost for Online Education and Digital Innovation at the University of Virginia. Welcome, Kemi.
Great to be here, Darren. Thank you.
Yeah, excited to have this conversation. We've been doing a series on experiential learning really for the last 4 months, and now it's taking shape with really bringing in some of the voices from within the institutions. And I'm looking forward to getting your framing on uh, the impact of experiential learning at University of Virginia. But I think first it would be great to just highlight a little bit of your background. I mean, before University of Virginia, you came from a university known as the gold standard for co-op and experiential learning, Northeastern. Um, Talk a little bit about how that maybe shaped the way you've thought about the work that you're doing at UVA.
Sure. Well, again, appreciate the opportunity to be here and talk today about issues that I think we're both passionate about, and I know your audience is also very passionate about. Um, so Northeastern, when I started in 2016, I was overseeing the bachelor completion portfolio in the College of Professional Studies, which, are working adult learners meeting age 34, um, veterans, single moms, the kind of post-traditional audience that we all know about. And despite being, as you said, at the kind of the headquarters of experiential learning in the US, right, Northeastern University with the great co-op program, I quickly realized that my learners couldn't avail themselves of co-op because it meant going someplace for 6 months, working full time, and then returning to school. And so um, as great as co-op is, it didn't serve my students at all, basically. And so I really started thinking hard about, well, like, first of all, that doesn't seem fair, right? Northeastern promises experiential learning, and we should deliver experiential learning to everybody, regardless of how you come to the university. And I started looking for answers for how do we do that in a way that is equitable for all our learners and provides the flexibility that students need.
I loved when we spoke last, you mentioned your term, like kind of flood the zone philosophy, right? And I think it gets at what you're saying, uh, both the scarcity and equity components at an institution other than Northeastern, right? So maybe talk a little bit about where that comes from, what are you flooding the zone with? What are you thinking about that starts to move the needle for more students?
Sure. Well, look, I mean, just to back up for a second, I mean, even at Northeastern, as great as co-op is, if you peel it back a little bit, there are still challenges um, in terms of making it really an ideal experience for students, right? So at Northeastern, everybody does typically two co-ops, sometimes three, right? And so if you think about it, that you really, to have only two bites at the apple is, even if, they go great, is a pretty limited and high risk choice, right? Because, if one of those doesn't go great or it's not the kind of experience that you want, now you're down to one experience left. And so, even then, it really feels to me like a very high stakes, fraught choice for students, whether it's just because they don't know what they want or because they thought they were signing up for X and they got Y when they did the co-op, right? And so that was another forcing factor, which is, as great as co-op is when it works well, even for the students who can avail themselves of it, those traditional residential students, it's still not perfect in all respects. And so, what could we do to help students make more informed choices
Right.
even if they do get to do a co-op or, an internship, as it exists in many other schools, which are traditionally a summer internship, to make that pay off better, to make the students more ready to hit the ground and get the most out of that experience, right? And so all of that contributed to kind of the thinking that I brought here to UVA about 2.5 years ago. That's when I really started leaning into uh, thinking about digital solution, uh, which here we've been partnering with Riipen to deliver a variety of different kind of experiential learning models. And that's where the sort of flood the zone idea came from is, even in an ideal situation, if you're a traditional undergrad, which again, we're leaving out a big part of the population, getting that great experience is not a slam dunk, right? And being ready to get the most out of it, even if you do get it, is not a slam dunk. And so, the flood the zone strategy for me has just been like, let's try to give students as many different kinds of opportunities as possible, not just one size fits all co-op or one size fits all summer internship, full time, paid, in person typically, right? Sometimes that means picking up and moving and renting an apartment in Manhattan, which is not cheap or easy for all students, right? And also, frankly, that getting an internship is fraught these days. Companies are disinvesting from those experiences. There's hundreds of applications per internship. The numbers are dropping by 10 to 20% a year in terms of postings, 20 to 30% if you're in TAC, right? So those are long odds for students. And so we really need to have a lot more options that are a lot more flexible for students to start, dipping their toe in low risk ways, experimenting with, trying different kinds of companies, different kinds of experiences, different roles, without kind of having to bet the farm on one big experience.
Is it, when I think flood the zone, I think, you know, literally just putting as many options in front of students as possible. But are you finding that there's a natural scaffolding effect where you start with a certain type of experience at the beginning, you end with this other, like, is there a natural ideal order or progression that you favor at this point?
I am not yet at the point of feeling confident that we know exactly what a progression looks like for all students under all circumstances and in all majors, right? That's a pretty arrogant kind of mindset. And so instead, I try to think more, Darren, about like, can we create opportunities that are low risk exploratory opportunities? And I think broadly, the kind of work that everyone has been doing in experiential learning, I mean, I'm really pleased to see, greater attention, greater recognition of the value, all the things that, you have been championing on your show and in your conversations. But where I think we've kind of dropped the ball is in the idea of early exploration, low risk exploration, right? We've always been focused on just like, get the co-op, get the internship, get more of them, whatever. But nobody's talking about like, how do you figure out what you are interested in? How do you allow students, particularly from less advantaged backgrounds, explore careers and fields that they have no prior experience in? Right. And so that low risk exploration is something that I've been really focused on trying to expand. And that's sort of part of the flood the zone idea, is just, provide enough opportunities that are low risk, low cost for students so that they can fit it in their schedule. They don't feel guilty if something happens and they, can't do it during the summer. We have a lot of students who, for example, student athletes who practice or, and work out during the summer. They can't do traditional internships. We have a lot of students who go home and have to do caregiving for their families, students who work in their family businesses back at home, a million and one different reasons, students who are traveling internationally. Just a lot of opportunities to fit it into your schedule around, very busy lives for students or working adults who are students, and to, let you feel comfortable exploring different kinds of things, building up to a deeper and richer experience. So this is not really a replacement strategy, but a augmentation strategy.
Yeah, no, that's important. I really like the emphasis on the low risk exploration. At least the framing of it. I think it
Yeah.
makes a lot of sense. It's something you can introduce into a lot of different student contexts and provide real value, um, just in the exploration itself. So other higher ed leaders that I've talked to as they've been exploring this come down on different. Uh, they land on slightly different conclusions around curricular versus co-curricular. And I think it probably has more to do with their unique student population than anything else. But I'm just curious at UVA, when you think about, you're trying to really scale this, you're trying to create the equity that, can otherwise be missing from some of these experiences. Um, how do you navigate curricular versus co-curricular at UVA? Or at least how would you like to?
Well, it's a great question, and as you suggested in your question, the people have different kind of preconceived notions about which way to tackle it and which one might be better. But again, my North Star is flood the zone, right? So it's all good. We should try to do all of the things, not just pick one and ignore the others. And so, curricular is great, but it can be slow to adopt because you have to sort of go door to door to each faculty member, and do the work of trying to kind of carve out space in their course and integrate it and whatnot. And when it works well, it can be very powerful, right? So I'm a huge champion of trying to do that when you can. But, I mean, even at a school like UVA, I mean, there's, thousands of courses every year, right? And so, even if you were just like, say, peeling off 10% a year, that's still going to take you 10 years to get through it. And then, students are still going to be left out just by random, schedule selections and whatnot. So, big fan, definitely do it. It's slow, it's hard work. Not every faculty member understands or values the idea of plugging experiential learning in. And, I'll make a broad generalization, but sort of like humanities, much slower to sort of recognize or, value that than like engineering faculty might be, right? Or business faculty, right? So it's a kind of a jagged frontier, if you will, of engaging faculty around that. And so, that leaves the sort of co-curricular category. And again, that's where, at least up until now here, we found good success, which is, students are kind of chock full with their schedules. After class, they have their clubs or sports or other things. Their schedules are crazy. And so, providing sort of asynchronous, flexible opportunities both during the term, but in particular, and we can talk more about this later, during school breaks, where we found a lot of uptake, right, during winter break and summer break, so that students who want to can opt in when they're not kind of running flat out during semesters.
I want to talk to you a little bit about some of these different places that you see innovation on the ground, student clubs, career academies, etc. But before that, you said something in our last conversation I thought was interesting. Was where faculty are starting to see something like Riipen as a backstop insurance policy for their capstone courses, right? And basically, if they come up short on projects, that's a pretty interesting use case in and of itself. Um, is that a wedge that could eventually lead to deeper integration in your mind, or is it truly just backstop uh, potential there?
No, I think, the example we were talking about is a master's in data science capstone course, and we partnered with the faculty there, who was already running essentially, an experiential capstone with employer partners. And, what he needed was just a little help making sure that, he had enough projects for everyone in the class. And so, maybe he had 7 and he needed 10, and he's like, can you just help me with the last 3? So that was not an issue of like convincing a faculty to do it, that he was already there, and it was just providing that supplemental help. I think, the short answer is yes. I do think, Darren, that it can be a wedge because, you know, when you stop and ask yourself, well, why are faculty not doing this in droves, right? Like, we know students want it, we know employers value it. Um, Having an internship type experience is always number one on the list of things employers say that they're looking for. I think ACNU just came out with a new report called the Agility Imperative, and the number one thing is apply knowledge to the real world, and teamwork and oral communication. Those are the top 3, right? And so you're like, well, duh, that's exactly what you get from these sorts of projects, right? So, but the reason we don't see more of it is it's really hard to do, right? I mean, it's like legitimately hard to do this stuff, and I think we need to just acknowledge that. Why is it hard? Well, even if you believe in it and you want to do it, finding employers is hard. Even this faculty member was like, yeah, I want to do it, but I don't have enough, right? So it's high risk. And one of the things I really loved about bringing Riipen in as a partner is that they act as a force multiplier for the faculty to help them find appropriate employer projects, right? So that takes that burden and risk kind of off the table. And then secondly, managing the whole experience is very fraught because you've got, 5, 10, 20 student teams all running in different directions. And you're like, how do I know if it's going okay? And I need to ensure that it's a good experience for everybody. And so managing it after you do find employers, also hard, right? And structuring and keeping everybody on track. So there's all these little pain points that I think it helps faculty start realizing, like, oh, okay, it's going to take care of some of the things that create friction for me as a faculty member.
I think you've given really great examples of flood the zone here. I mean, from the early experience exploration side of things all the way through capstone types of scenarios, you're hitting nicely on the friction and the opportunity to really enable faculty at the right points.
Huh?
But let's talk a little bit about your discovery around student clubs. I thought it was really interesting that, and I don't know, maybe you could just explain the story, but I feel like you had said that effectively they wanted to come in and take ownership of these types of projects. But can you talk a little bit about your observation of student clubs and the opportunity that you see there for experiential learning?
Sure. No, it's a really great kind of story to tell. And again, this is one of those things that, to be completely honest, I did not see coming. This was not on my bingo card at all. But, one of the advantages of doing a flood the zone approach is that you bump into opportunities that you didn't see coming, just like this. And so last year we ran what we call the UVA Career Academy, both during J term, which is our winter break, and during summer vacation last year. And we reached out to students, via different club activities, the Data Analytics Club, Women in Computing Club, Association for Computing Machinery, et cetera, Society of Women Engineers. And we recruited them to be part of some of these career academies, which essentially pair up sort of online Google courses with a Riipen employer experience together. And, they had a great experience. And we sort of asked ourselves, well, okay, this is great. We went from, about 55 students in J term to close to 90 students in the summer. So we almost doubled. And, I stopped and asked myself, well, like, okay, if we keep doubling, how
Right.
is my office going to keep up with this kind of demand? It's a lot of work to run these programs. So we, came up with the idea of like talking to the student club presidents, the leaders, and we asked them like, well, we saw so many of your participants, your club members really enjoying this experience. How about if you ran it for your own club? Right. And we would hand it off to you. We would backstop you, of course, with some of the technical support, but it would be your job to sort of promote it to your club members,
Yeah.
designate someone to run it and manage it, do the team assignments. And they really resonated to that idea and rose to the occasion because they were looking for activities that were relevant to their club, that would engage the club members together, which is exactly what these team projects do. And because it built up, resume worthy experiences, which they also want. And so all of that together really kind of unlocked this idea, which we're piloting this year with, I think, 4 clubs, to let them kind of take the driver's wheel and run with it, again, with our support behind the scenes, as a mechanism for scaling this, both, in terms of lowering the administrative costs that we bear centrally, and empowering the students to kind of pick and choose and run it in the flavor that makes the most sense for them. So analytics club, obviously they're going to want analytics projects, and the
Right.
computing club might want software projects, et cetera, et cetera. So, so far so good. It's still a first pass. So, I'm not ready to, put a bow on it yet, but really encouraged and would certainly recommend your audience and listeners who are thinking about how do you do this at scale without incurring massive central administrative costs, to really think about engaging those student club leaders with a tool like this. And I'm optimistic that it's going to really pay off.
That's great. I mean, the student club is sort of infrastructure for scale. Like it's
Free infrastructure for scale. That's the best part. It's free infrastructure.
yeah, yeah, and they get a lot out of it. So, I mean, I know it's early, but uh, what makes a club a good candidate? I mean, or are there obvious choices that are just, you know, from your perspective?
No, I think any club that, has at least some career orientation to it, right? If it's just like, let's go out and go hiking in the woods or something, that might be a different story. But, anything that has, a career oriented flavor to it, I think is a good one. But look, the other thing, just to say, even though it's sort of obvious, is without kind of an underlying platform like the Google courses or the Riipen platform to do the matching, find the employers, and do the administration, this would not be possible, right? So a platform like Riipen really unlocks the ability for a
Mm,
student club leader with no special training to do what is arguably a pretty complicated undertaking, and completely lower the barriers to entry for something like this. So a tool like Riipen, like good infrastructure, enables scaling.
right. Yeah. I mean, it's clear that you need it on the faculty side to sort of lower the burden and the risk of adoption there. You need it on the student club side, and on your side, right? Because to your point, if of the hundreds of clubs that are career aligned, all of a sudden say, yeah, yes, please. What do you do?
Yeah.
Love it.
Yeah.
Uh,
But again, from an innovation perspective, Darren, right? Like if we stop and think about like, would this idea be possible without the technical infrastructure? The answer is absolutely no, right? No individual club could probably manage to recruit enough employers, do all the stuff by hand, right, manage all the complexity. It would just be a non-starter, right? So that's kind of a, if we step back and take an innovation lens on
Mhm.
it, which I know, you've been a big champion of, um, these kinds of tools can unlock innovation in a variety of ways. And this is just one example that, again, to be completely frank, I did not have on my radar screen, but, sort of figured, well, why not? Let's give it a try. And if it works, great. We can really reach students and really implement that kind of flood the zone idea by getting it closer to what the students actually want.
Double click on your student athlete scenario. I know you mentioned it briefly before, but uh, I hadn't really thought about it. Like you well, talk about why the student athlete is a good candidate for this kind of experience, and um, and then what you're finding working with student athletes today with experiential learning.
Sure. Yeah, the student athlete thing again was not something we went looking for. We kind of stumbled on it as we were having conversations across grounds, which is what we call campus here. And in talking with the sort of academic liaison in athletics, we really understood pretty quickly that student athletes. I mean, as busy as a regular student is, a student athlete is like 10x as busy, right? Because they're doing 20 plus hours of practice on top of everything all the other students are doing. And, but they're also incredibly disciplined, good at time management, you know, typically very competitive and ambitious. And just like any other student, they have aspirations for their career that, in most cases does not involve becoming a pro in, whatever sport it is. And, at the same time, the schedule commitments that they have precluded their participation in traditional summer internships because they practice and work out, almost all summer, or they're traveling to meets, or they're playing in other kinds of leagues just to keep up their fitness and skills. And so we quickly realized that just like all the other student scenarios that we talked about earlier, Darren, that they too were sort of wanting an experiential learning experience, but were not able to do it for pragmatic reasons. And so, um, you know, even one of the options we gave them was a 2 hour synchronous session here as one of the credit bearing options this summer. And even that was too much for a lot of them because if it falls right in the middle of football practice, you're not going. That's just like that's how it is. And so providing students with both, synchronous, but also this sort of flexible asynchronous um, opportunity really unlock for them the ability to have the kind of experiences that they really want to build up their resume with business related skills and experiences while they're still doing all the workouts and practices and things that they want.
All right, so we've covered several interesting elements about how to effectively scale through your flood the zone strategy here. Um, and I have to just acknowledge that you've been doing this at UVA for how long? A year?
About 2 years now. Yeah.
2 years? So 2 years in, there's been a lot of experimentation, a lot of you know direction. Um, I I'm encouraged at the speed in which you've been able to do that at a large R1 institution. But where's where are the natural points of friction that people might not think of when thinking about trying to scale this from your perspective?
Well, it's a great question, Darren, and really cuts to the heart of the challenges in meeting student interest and student demand for these kinds of experiences. So, um, you know, this might be a little bit of sort of inside baseball, but since you asked, let's peel back the layers. So. one of the things that I discovered here, and every institution's got a little bit of a different configuration, but I think generally this is probably true. The career center here sits under student affairs, which sits outside of the academic side of the house, which rolls up to the provost at most institutions. So just there you've got the career center, which houses most of the career connected work-based learning kinds of opportunities, not in the same organization as the academic side, right? So right there, you can already anticipate how hard it might be to weave together, as you said, like the curricular integration parts of this challenge, right? Which is another reason why going co-curricular can help, because then you don't have to deal with that. But anyway, so organizationally, you've got just the facts on the ground, which is career center over here, academic side over here. That makes things problematic just because they're different budgets and different people calling the shots and all the, even though we're all working for the students, of course, but just to put it out there. Then at UVA especially, but probably in most other universities, there are sometimes career centers located in the schools and colleges themselves. So the business school has their own career center, the engineering school has their career center. So now you've got different career centers sprinkled around, and some students are going to the school-based one and others are going to the central one. And then you've just got more chaos in terms of like who's running the show and who's actually the person that you'd have to go to scale this thing out to the particular students. There's some advantages because if you, let's say, go to the business school, engineering school, they're probably closer with their faculty. And so the chance that they could engage with the department chairs and others to kind of make this happen is better. But like, you've got to figure out like, well, how many career centers are there and who are you supposed to talk to get this adopted, right? And then, finally the issue around just the multitude of platforms and tools that the career centers often have is what I call like a petting zoo, right? Because they're just like all these things, they don't talk to each other. Students are kind of overwhelmed by like, oh, there's one tool to do my resume and there's another tool to get my internships. And then there's practice interview tool. It's just like there's probably a dozen of them. Right. And so when you try to introduce something new, everyone's like, well, yeah, we already got 12 of them. Like, why do we need another one now? Right. And why is this one better than the other ones that we've got? And then, of course, the students like either they don't use any of them or they don't even know. So, those are just the kinds of, landscape of challenges that you have as you try to go in and scale, something like this and try to make it, available. And so, again, for me, at least, it pushed me to try to do both, the curricular parts as best we could, but just to, go direct to student where possible, either by running the career academy kinds of things by ourselves or by engaging student clubs so that regardless of where the students were and which school they were in and what the status of, the career center adoption was, that we could try to make something happen for them sooner rather than later.
I'm also curious, just from your experience, I've seen this at a few institutions where when going curricular, there's often existing interdisciplinary course codes existing out there that you could plug in these types of experiences for credit. How does that kind of, is that a reality at a UVA, or would that be more challenging from your experience?
Well, no, we actually, the provost office has its own course code, which we use rarely, but sometimes, and specifically for something like this, where we try to do kind of an internship wraparound for credit so that students who do need the credit can have that experience. But again, we run into, at least here, but in probably almost every university, the kinds of internal barriers around whether how many credits you're allowed to take outside of your school. So, here, if you're in arts and sciences, out of 120, I think you can take 12 credits outside of arts and sciences, right? And so where that interdisciplinary course is or experiential course is listed actually matters, because if it's outside of your college or school, then it doesn't count towards your major or your degree, which maybe doesn't matter for some students, but does matter for other students. And so you just get tripped up on stuff like that, and it
Right.
slows down the ability to let all students avail themselves of it, because otherwise you've got to have like the same exact course listed in every major school or college so that it counts for everybody, and then you're just going to 10 different departments for approval, and it gets to be
Yeah.
a drag.
Right. Yeah. It's kind of reverse engineering something that wouldn't necessarily help you scale, um, but might be an interesting point of entry for a pilot or something. Um,
That's right.
yeah, I'm struck that the last conversation I had, by the way, was with Dr. John Rindy at Slippery Rock University, which is in Pennsylvania, and regional comprehensive university traditionally has you know uh, uh, a bigger challenge with retention, and um, and yet they have really good retention. Um, I think 86 or 89% for a regional is pretty
It's
good,
fantastic. Yeah.
and um, and they really attribute it to, I think, a similar flood the zone strategy there.
I
Um,
should trademark it. Yeah.
yeah, you should. You should, because I think there's what what I was expecting to try and uncover was really discreetly different strategies at a larger R1 versus a regional comprehensive. And I don't know that I'm seeing that. I'm seeing the why being different, maybe in some cases, but also the why is also overlapping. So it's really uh, it's enlightening to me that you know that both types of institutions can have similar levels of success, similar challenges around the curricular versus co-curricular, um, but there's definitely what you're doing at UVA, to put a broader point on it, is widely applicable in the market, which I think is great to see. I wanted to, while we have a couple minutes left, hit on just a couple of things, but one was that I think when you and I spoke last, we talked a little bit about experiential learning as authentic assessment, and uh, I've been introduced to the term authentic assessment, not being an academic myself, but understanding it to be that in an AI world, we're starting to question the value of different types of assessment. And so I wonder if this is just another one of your learnings that you weren't expecting, but could you talk a little bit about your view of and maybe vision for experiential learning as assessment?
Yeah. It's one of these things that I think, Darren, kind of history snuck up on us, right, while we weren't looking or expecting it. And so, experiential learning, as you and your listeners know, it's been around for a long, long time, well before AI showed up on the scene in the way that we're experiencing it today. And certainly, well before the sort of crisis of confidence that we had in, student work reflecting student thinking and student learning, which is really what we're grappling with right now is, does a paper reflect the thought processes that we always assumed it did, or whatever the other kind of assessment deliverables that we're talking about. And when you look at kind of what is the heart of an experiential learning experience, whether it's in person or virtual, it is tackling a real world messy problem typically, that often does not have one single right answer all the time. It's contextual and it depends. It has multiple constraints that push you in different to make different trade-offs and choices, like the real world. It often involves working in teams collaboratively. It involves sort of negotiating scope and time and other factors with the employer, who might be a member of the C-suite or other executive or manager who is much more senior than you are, but at the same time might have less technical ability. Like when we do our analytics projects, right? We have students coming back to the chief marketing officer and saying, well, like, yeah, I understand you want like this kind of report, but your data is not adequate to answer it. So let's talk about what questions we can answer with the data, right? Which is an incredibly sophisticated thing for a sophomore undergraduate to have with a chief marketing officer, right? And so, all of those skills, giving and receiving feedback, right, is another incredibly important skill. All of those things, in my view, are both, consistently rated as the most valued skills that employers are looking for. No matter what survey or what year, they're always in the top 10. And secondly, they're the most AI proof, in my view, because it's virtually impossible to imagine how you could fake your way with AI through that kind of an employer project in a team with your fellow students and friends who know you and know how you talk, and are working on deliverables with you all along the way so that they see the process, not just the product, right? That, is being, the deliverables being put in front of, an experienced senior person who presumably can tell, good from bad, and can challenge your assumptions and your thinking in a way that was going to force you to think on your feet and defend your methods and your process. All of those things, to me, speak directly to this idea of the kinds of hand-wringing and I think legitimate worry that we have around how do we design these academic experiences and authentic assessments to avoid the kinds of concerns, either rightly or wrongly, around AI substituting for student work. So I've been a big fan of it all along, as we've been talking about, and have been working on it, probably for 8 or 10 years since I was at Northeastern. But, AI kind of snuck up on this conversation. And when you step back and ask, well, like, what are the kinds of solutions that we might look for to address the legitimate concerns around academic integrity and other things in the era of AI, we don't have to look a lot further than the kinds of practices that we're already doing in experiential learning, and that we've already built up a lot of knowledge and infrastructure and experience about how to manage those at scale. So, like I said, it was one of those serendipitous insights, but I think is something that everyone needs to take a hard look at, because some of the answers are right here under our noses.
That was probably the biggest eye opener that I feel like I've had in this conversation on experiential learning, was just how much A, we need to do more to scale it. B, it actually can have a broader application from an academic value perspective than I think we would have originally thought about. So this is exciting. Well, I have one last question for you. It's sort of self-serving for the solution provider community, the vendors that are out there, but I think you'd have a sensitivity to this. Someone wants to work with you. What do you wish they understood about how decisions get made, and about what actually moves the needle when they're having a conversation to explore their solution at your institution?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's obviously something that my office spends a lot of time actually trying to figure out. And in fact, Office was created to do digital innovation and to tackle that exact challenge. And so, the playbook that we've adopted, Darren, in which, again, people are welcome to replicate or to challenge, is to engage with new partners, new vendors, in sort of a pilot experience together, where we both recognize that it's going to take a while for us to find whether there's traction here at the university, where that traction might come from, because it sometimes comes in unexpected places, who the internal champions are, and find a place that will give that new tool or technology a permanent budget home, right? Because often, as we talked about with the Career Center, you're going to have to displace some other tool in the budget in order to carve out room for your tool, because budgets are tight. They're either flat or down.
Right.
And so, you're going to need internal champions who are really raising their hand and saying, we want this, we need this, we know how it's going to work. We've tried it with our students and our advisors or whoever, career coaches, and they love it. And that's what we try to do over a 1 to 2 year kind of pilot and discovery period. And going in with that kind of mindset, finding a partner, ideally like my office internally, that whose charge and mission it is to do that innovation, to help the vendor navigate internally, because that is really complicated and confusing. Even if you're a seasoned higher ed veteran, it looks, as you said, different at a regional comprehensive than it does at an R1, and so on and so forth. And so having the patience and the timeline, which I recognize is challenging when you're under, quarterly or annual revenue pressures, to really figure out, is this a good fit, versus trying to front load that entire thing up front and try to get to a contract on day zero before you have even tried it anywhere, in my view, is a lot harder sell. So you have to be willing to go on that journey of discovery together. And as we talked about in the case with, Riipen, who's been a great partner for us, I've been challenging them pretty hard for 2 years now, almost 2 years, to think differently about how we might deploy, and kind of, eventually we ended up calling it Flood the Zone, but really that represented this idea that, like, we're not just going to try one thing, we're going to try 10 things, and we're going to see which of those 10 things really gets traction and with whom, and that's how we're going to figure out whether this thing is working and delivering value. And I can't do that with a piece of paper or statement of work or contract on day zero without doing that journey together.
Well, I'm glad that you took the time to talk about it. I think an office like yours, absolutely, you're at the forefront of dealing with the newer technologies, and having a strategy for it is so important. We really believe in working with a lot of the startups and the scale ups, that a lot of the legacy systems and solutions, they have their place, but when it's coming to actually doing innovation, you need innovation partners that you can align with early. We talk about the concept of co-readiness with institutions, as opposed to selling, right? Because it's really, selling is an old concept of, let me convince you of something that you don't already know. And establishing co-readiness and allows for a space to be created with someone like yourself, where we can explore innovation together on your terms in a way that de-risks for the institution, but also gives the vendor a path to true partnership. And that's, I think, what's key and sometimes missing when we have these sort of vendor institution relationships that are not as sensitively portrayed as you do. So excited to see that you have an approach to this. Makes total sense. And your Riipen partnership is obviously a good testament to that. It sounds like they're doing some great work with you. So excited to see where this goes. Hey, thanks so much for taking the time to be on on this show today. I hope that our technical difficulties didn't get in the way of any of it, but our great editors will figure that out. But thanks again for taking the time, Kevin. We appreciate this.
My pleasure. It's been a real privilege to spend time with you, Darren. I appreciate the thoughtful conversation and the work that you are doing to kind of advance our thinking across the board. It's really needed in this day and age. So kudos to you.
Thanks.